black family vanished from a Chicago apartment. 9 months later, a chilling discovery in the basement. The divorce papers were still warm in Darren Green's jacket pocket when he pulled up to the Meridian Apartments on Chicago's south side. The brick building stood like a weathered giant against the gray October sky, its windows staring down at him with what felt like judgment. At 34, starting over shouldn't feel this terrifying, but here he was, a middle school history teacher with half his belongings in a U-Haul and nowhere else to go. "You sure about this place?" his brother Marcus had asked over the phone. "Rent that cheap in Chicago? Something's gotta be wrong with it." But Darren's teacher salary and the brutal divorce settlement left him with few options. When the landlord, a heavy-set man named Vincent Torino, had practically begged him to take Unit 4B, Darren hadn't asked too many questions. $400 below market rate was $400 he desperately needed. Now, standing in the lobby with its flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of old cigarettes mixed with industrial cleaner, he wondered if Marcus had been right. "Mr. Green!" Torino's voice boomed across the lobby. The man emerged from behind a cluttered desk, his expensive suit somehow making him look more suspicious rather than professional. "Ready to get settled? Unit 4B's been waiting for the right tenant." "How long has it been empty?" Darren asked, shifting his duffel bag to his other shoulder. "Oh, not too long. Previous tenants moved out sudden-like. You know how it is, people get restless, want to try something new." Torino's laugh didn't reach his eyes. "Family of 5. Just up and left one night. Didn't even give proper notice." They rode the elevator in silence, the ancient machinery groaning with each floor. When they reached the 4th floor, Darren noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet for a building that should be full of families getting ready for dinner. "Here we are," Torino said, fumbling with an oversized key ring. "Your new home." The doors swung open to reveal a surprisingly spacious 2-bedroom apartment. Hardwood floors stretched across the living room, and large windows offered a view of the courtyard below. For the rent he was paying, it should have been a dump. Instead, it was almost too good to be true. "Previous tenants leave anything behind?" Darren asked, walking to the center of the room. "Nah, they cleaned out everything. Real thorough." Torino handed him the keys, his thick fingers lingering on Darren's palm longer than necessary. "You seem like a quiet type." "That's good. We like quiet tenants here." After Torino left, Darren spent the next hour bringing up boxes from his U-Haul. The building felt like a tomb, no sounds of children playing, no music from neighboring apartments, no normal signs of life. When he asked the only neighbor he encountered, an elderly woman with suspicious eyes, about the building's atmosphere, she just shook her head and hurried past. "Quiet building," she muttered without looking back. By evening, Darren had managed to set up his bedroom and was working on arranging the living room furniture. He'd pushed his couch against the far wall when he felt it, a steady stream of cold air that made him shiver despite the October heat still trapped in the building. The draft seemed to be coming from behind the old radiator in the corner. Darren knelt down, running his hand along the baseboard. The cold air was definitely flowing from somewhere behind the heating unit. "That's weird," he muttered, grabbing a flashlight from his toolbox. The radiator was old and heavy, but with some effort, he managed to shift it a few inches away from the wall. Behind it, the baseboard had warped, creating a gap just wide enough for something to have fallen through, or been hidden there. His flashlight beam caught something white wedged in the space. Darren reached in carefully, his fingers closing around what felt like plastic wrapping. He pulled it out slowly, his heart beginning to race. It was a rent ledger, wrapped in a clear plastic bag that had somehow protected it from water damage. The leather cover was cracked and faded, but the pages inside were still readable. Darren's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, not sure what he expected to find. Most of the entries were standard: tenant names, apartment numbers, monthly payments. But as he flipped through the pages, one entry made him stop cold. Unit B basement service fee, paid in cash $2,400. The entry was dated 8 months ago, signed with initials he couldn't make out. But what made his blood run cold was the apartment designation. There was no unit B listed anywhere in the building directory. He'd checked when he first arrived. Darren flipped through more pages, finding similar entries scattered throughout the ledger. Basement service fees. Cash payments. Amounts that seemed far too high for any kind of maintenance work. And next to several entries, including the most recent ones, someone had drawn small symbols, tiny marks that looked almost like a code. The last entry in the ledger was dated exactly 9 months ago. The same time frame Torino had mentioned for when the previous tenants had moved out sudden-like. Darren sat back on his heels, the ledger heavy in his hands. The apartment suddenly felt colder, and not just because of the draft from behind the radiator. Something about this place was wrong. Very wrong. He thought about the family of 5 who had lived here before him. Had they found this ledger too? Had they started asking questions about basement service fees and cash payments to non-existent units? And if they had, where were they now? Outside his window, the courtyard was empty except for a single figure standing under a streetlight. Even from 4 floors up, Darren could see the man was looking directly at his apartment. When their eyes met through the glass, the figure didn't look away. Instead, he raised one hand in what might have been a wave, or a warning. Darren stepped back from the window, his heart hammering in his chest. When he looked again, the courtyard was empty. He clutched the rent ledger tighter, knowing with absolute certainty that finding it had changed everything. Whatever had happened to the family who lived here before, whatever secrets this building held, he was now part of it whether he wanted to be or not. The question was, would he end up like them, vanished without a trace? Or would he be smart enough to uncover the truth before it was too late? As if in response to his thoughts, the heating system kicked on with a loud bang that echoed through the walls. But the sound seemed to come from below, much deeper than any basement he knew about. Darren looked down at the ledger one more time, focusing on those mysterious symbols beside the cash payments. Whatever they meant, he had the sinking feeling they were about to become very important to his survival. The next morning brought no relief from the questions that had kept Darren awake most of the night. He'd hidden the rent ledger in his bedroom closet, but its existence gnawed at him like a splinter under his skin. Over coffee and toast, he made a decision. He needed to know more about his neighbors and the family who had lived here before. The hallway on the 4th floor felt different in daylight, but not less unsettling. The carpet was worn thin in spots, and several of the wall sconces had burned out bulbs that cast strange shadows. Darren knocked on 4A first, hearing movement inside but getting no answer. He tried 4C with the same result. "They don't like talking to new people," a voice said behind him. Darren turned to find an elderly black woman standing by the elevator, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a faded housedress and held a laundry basket against her hip. Her eyes were sharp, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I'm Darren Green," he said, extending his hand. "Just moved into 4B. I know who you are." She didn't take his hand. "I'm Ruby Washington. Been living here 15 years. Ms. Ruby, I was hoping you could tell me about the family who lived in my apartment before. The landlord said they moved out suddenly." Ruby's expression darkened. She glanced around the hallway, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "That family got too curious. That's all I'll say." "Curious about what? You seem like a nice young man," Ruby said, adjusting her grip on the laundry basket. "Take some advice from someone who's survived this long in this building. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." Before Darren could respond, she was walking away, her house slippers silent on the worn carpet. But just before she reached the elevator, she paused and looked back. "The Williams family," she said quietly. "Marcus and Shanice Williams. 3 kids, Tamara, Derek, and little Keisha. They were good people. Real good people." The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving Darren alone with more questions than answers. Throughout the day, Darren tried to engage other residents. The young couple in 3B hurried past him with barely a nod. The man in 2A looked right through him as if he didn't exist. But it was the maintenance man who made his skin crawl. Harold Gitz appeared to be everywhere, mopping floors that looked clean, checking light fixtures that worked fine, always watching. He was a thin man with yellowed teeth and hands that shook slightly, as if he drank too much coffee or something stronger. Every time Darren asked about the basement or building maintenance, Harold's watery blue eyes would narrow. "New tenant asking a lot of questions," Harold muttered during their third encounter that day. "Just trying to understand the building," Darren replied, forcing a smile. Harold's laugh was like sandpaper. "Understanding ain't always healthy, boy. Some things better left alone." By afternoon, Darren had had enough of cryptic warnings. He needed facts, not riddles. The Cook County Administration building was a 20-minute bus ride away, and by 4 o'clock, he was sitting across from a bored-looking clerk named Janet, who smelled like cigarettes and cheap perfume. "Building records for the Meridian Apartments," Darren said, sliding a formal request form across the counter. "Tax records, utility bills, tenant histories, whatever's public." Janet sighed dramatically but processed his request. An hour later, Darren was hunched over a table in the records room, surrounded by manila folders and photocopied documents. What he found made his blood run cold. The utility bills showed consistent payments for basement heating and electricity going back 5 years, but the building was only supposed to have one basement level. More disturbing were the tax records, which listed rental income from units that didn't exist in the building directory. Unit B1, Unit B2, Unit B3, all generating rental income. All listed as occupied by tenants whose names appeared nowhere else in the city's records. When Darren cross-referenced the names with voter registration and property records, most came back as deceased or completely untraceable. Thomas Henley, listed as tenant of B1, had died 3 years ago. Margaret Foster, supposedly living in B2, had no social security number on file anywhere. David Kowalski from B3 had been deceased for 6 years. Deceased people were paying rent on non-existent apartments. The pattern went back years, but what made Darren's hands shake was the most recent addition to the records. Just 10 months ago, a new tenant had been added to Unit B4, Marcus Williams. The same Marcus Williams that Ruby had mentioned, the father of the vanished family. As Darren gathered the papers, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join them." He looked around the empty records room, his heart pounding. No one else was there. No one should know what he was researching. Walking back to the Meridian Apartments felt like walking toward a trap, but he had nowhere else to go. In the lobby, Harold was pretending to fix a light fixture that had been working fine that morning. When Darren passed, the maintenance man looked up with a knowing smile. "Find what you were looking for downtown?" Harold asked. Darren didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Harold's smile widened, showing those yellow teeth. "Thought so. Word of advice, boy, some records are kept for a reason. And some people who go looking for them, well, they tend to disappear." That night, Darren triple-checked his locks and wedged a chair under his door handle. Outside his window, the courtyard was empty, but he could swear he saw movement in the shadows near the building's entrance. The Williams family had found something. They'd discovered the same impossible truth he was uncovering, that the Meridian Apartments was running some kind of elaborate fraud using fake tenants and phantom basement units. And now they were gone. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken by every creak and groan of the old building. When morning finally arrived, Darren felt like he'd been hit by a truck, but his determination had only grown stronger. The Williams family deserved better than to simply vanish into thin air, forgotten by everyone except cryptic neighbors and threatening maintenance men. He started with the basics. Social media had become the modern paper trail, and if Marcus Williams had been investigating building violations, there might be digital breadcrumbs left behind. Darren spent the morning scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, searching for any trace of the family. Marcus Williams was a common name, but when Darren added Chicago and family, he found them. The profile picture showed a handsome man in his 30s with kind eyes, standing next to a beautiful woman with natural hair and a warm smile. 3 children were squeezed between them, a teenage girl, a boy around 10, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. The Williamses looked happy. Normal. Like any family trying to make a life in the city. But their social media had gone silent 9 months ago. The last post on Shanice's Instagram was a photo of little Keisha starting kindergarten, captioned, "My baby's first day. Time flies so fast. #ProudMama #Chicago Public Schools." The date stamp showed it was posted just 2 weeks before they vanished. Darren scrolled through older posts, looking for anything that might connect to the building or hint at trouble. Most were typical family moments: birthday parties, school events, Sunday dinners. But then he found something that made his pulse quicken. 3 months before they disappeared, Shanice had posted a photo of water damage in what looked like their kitchen. The caption read, "When you pay rent on time every month but the landlord won't fix basic problems. Water been leaking for weeks. Kids can't even use their bathroom. #tenant rights #Chicago rentals #enough is enough." The comments were revealing. Friends and family members offered sympathy and advice. One comment from someone named concerned_neighbor_chi caught his attention. "Girl, you need to report this. I know people who can help. DM me." Darren clicked on the commenter's profile, but the account had been deleted. He spent the next hour combing through Marcus's Facebook page, finding more evidence of growing frustration with their living situation. A post from 4 months before their disappearance read, "Paying good money to live in a place that's falling apart. Landlord promises fixes that never come. Starting to think there's more going on here than just negligence." The final clue came from a neighborhood Facebook group called South Side Tenants Unite. Marcus had joined the group 6 months before the family vanished and had made several posts about suspected fraud and building code violations. His last post in the group was chilling. "Has anyone else noticed landlords listing fake tenants on their tax records? Found some weird stuff in my building's paperwork. Cash payments for apartments that don't exist. Thinking about filing a complaint with the city. Anyone know a good lawyer who handles tenant fraud cases?" That post had received dozens of responses, but when Darren tried to click on them, he found the entire thread had been deleted. The group administrators had marked it as resolved, but there was no explanation of how or why. Darren's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone. He needed to call someone, but who could he trust? The police? What would he tell them? That a family had disappeared and he'd found some suspicious paperwork. That deceased people were allegedly paying rent? Instead, he decided to dig deeper online. If Marcus Williams had been investigating building fraud, there might be other traces of his research. Darren tried a more targeted search, looking for tenant rights forums and complaint websites. That's when he found it. Buried in a housing advocacy forum called Chicago Tenant Justice, posted under the username Marcus W_Southside, was a detailed thread about suspected money laundering through fake rental agreements. The post was dated exactly 10 months ago, just weeks before the family disappeared. "Need advice from anyone who's dealt with this before." The post began. "My landlord is running some kind of scam using fake tenants and cash transactions. Found evidence of payments for basement units that don't exist. Pretty sure he's laundering money through rental income from deceased people. Family's safety might be at risk if we report this. What's the best way to expose this without putting my wife and kids in danger?" The responses were a mix of legal advice and warnings to be careful. But one response, from a user called Inside Source, made Darren's blood run cold. "Get out now. Don't wait, don't investigate further, just take your family and leave. I've seen this before in Chicago. These operations don't just move money, they eliminate threats. If you've already found evidence, you're already in danger." Marcus had responded, "Can't just run. Got nowhere to go and kids in school. But I hear you about the danger. If something happens to us, I've hidden copies of everything. The basement's the key to all of it." That was Marcus Williams's final post anywhere online. Darren sat back in his chair, feeling sick. The Williams family hadn't just stumbled onto a simple fraud scheme. They'd uncovered something much bigger and more dangerous. And when they tried to expose it, they'd been silenced. But Marcus had been smart. He'd hidden evidence, and he'd specifically mentioned the basement as the key to understanding everything. The same basement that was generating rental income from non-existent units. The same basement that Harold the maintenance man seemed so protective of. Darren looked at the rent ledger he'd found, focusing on those strange symbols beside the final entries. Suddenly, they didn't look like random marks anymore. They looked like a desperate man's attempt to leave a trail that his family's disappearance wouldn't be in vain. Outside his window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Soon it would be dark enough to explore the building without being seen. Tonight, he was going to find out what secrets the Meridian Apartments was hiding in its basement. But first, Darren needed to understand what Marcus Williams had been trying to tell him through those cryptic symbols in the rent ledger. If the Williams family had hidden evidence, and if Marcus had been smart enough to leave a trail, then every mark in that ledger could be crucial. Darren spread the ledger pages across his kitchen table under a bright lamp, studying each symbol with a magnifying glass he'd borrowed from his teaching supplies. The marks were subtle, tiny scratches and dots that could easily be mistaken for accidental pen marks or water damage. But when he looked closely, patterns emerged. Some symbols appeared repeatedly. Others were unique to specific entries. And beside the final payments, the ones dated just before the Williams family disappeared, the symbols became more complex, almost frantic. His phone buzzed with a text from his teacher friend Sarah Chin, who worked at the university library. "Hey, still on for coffee tomorrow? Also found that cryptography book you asked about." Darren had forgotten he'd called Sarah that morning, asking if she knew anyone who could help decode symbols. Sarah taught linguistics and had mentioned once that she'd taken graduate courses in historical cryptography. If anyone could help him understand what Marcus Williams had been trying to communicate, it would be her. "Change of plans?" he texted back. "Can you meet tonight? It's urgent." An hour later, Sarah sat across from him at a 24-hour diner on the north side, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, and her reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd brought a thick textbook called Codes and Ciphers Throughout History, and was studying photocopies of the ledger pages with intense concentration. "These aren't random," she said finally, tapping her pen against the table. "Someone was definitely trying to create a code, but it's not sophisticated. More like desperate improvisation." "What do you mean?" Sarah pointed to a series of small dots beside one of the cash payment entries. "See this pattern? 3 dots, pause, 2 dots, pause, 1 dot. That's not accidental. And look here." She flipped to another page. "The same pattern appears twice more, but with variations. Can you decode it?" "Maybe. It looks like a simple substitution cipher, possibly using numbers or dates." Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened a spreadsheet. "If we assume the dots represent numbers, and the small lines represent letters or dates." For the next 2 hours, they worked through the symbols systematically. Sarah's expertise in pattern recognition, combined with Darren's knowledge of the building's layout and history, slowly began to unlock Marcus Williams's hidden message. The breakthrough came when Sarah noticed that several symbols appeared to correlate with dates on the building's utility records. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a complex symbol beside the Williams family's final payment. "If we read this as numbers separated by lines, it could be coordinates, or, wait." She grabbed her pen and started scribbling calculations. "S2, she said suddenly. "The vertical line with 2 dots could be S2. And this curved mark with the vertical line." She looked up at Darren with excitement. "Does clean sweep mean anything to you?" Darren's blood went cold. "Say that again." "If I'm reading this correctly, the last coded entry translates to S2, clean sweep. The vertical line could be a separator, like a divider between location and action. S2 means sublevel 2, Darren whispered. Marcus figured out there was a second basement level. Sarah frowned. "But you said the building only shows B1 on the elevator." "That's the point. No one's supposed to know about a sublevel 2. Darren's mind was racing. "And clean sweep, that sounds like they were planning to eliminate evidence," Sarah finished. or eliminate witnesses. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the discovery settling over them. Marcus Williams hadn't just found evidence of fraud, he'd uncovered proof of a hidden level in the building where something terrible was happening. And his final coded message, written just 3 days before his family vanished, suggested he knew they were about to be silenced. "There's more," Sarah said quietly, pointing to smaller symbols scattered throughout the final pages. "These look like meeting times or appointment codes. Someone was tracking when people came and went." Darren studied the patterns she was indicating. Several symbols were repeated on specific dates, always followed by numbers that could represent times. "It's like Marcus was documenting a schedule," he realized. "Tracking when whoever runs this operation was active. Or when they were planning their next move," Sarah added grimly. The final piece of the puzzle came when Sarah noticed that the last symbol in the ledger, drawn so faintly it was almost invisible, wasn't part of the code at all. It was an arrow, pointing toward the bottom of the page. "He was pointing to something," Darren said, studying the direction of the arrow. "Something below. Or someone," Sarah replied. "This whole code reads like a man trying to leave breadcrumbs for whoever found it after he was gone." Darren felt a chill run down his spine. Marcus Williams had known they were in danger. He'd known that finding the truth about the basement operations might cost him and his family their lives. But he'd been brave enough to document everything anyway, hoping that someday, someone would find his hidden message and continue the investigation. "I have to go back to the building," Darren said, gathering up the ledger pages. "Are you insane?" Sarah grabbed his wrist. "If you're right about what happened to this family, then you're walking into the same trap. I can't just let this go. That family deserves justice." Sarah studied his face in the harsh diner lighting. "Then you're not going alone. And we're not going unprepared." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I have a friend who's an investigative journalist. If we're really doing this, we need someone on the outside who knows where we are and what we're looking for." As they made plans for what could be the most dangerous night of Darren's life, he couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Williams was somehow guiding him forward. The codes, the symbols, the carefully hidden ledger, it all felt like a father's desperate attempt to protect not just his own family's memory, but future victims of whatever horror was hidden in Sublevel 2. The elevator at the Meridian Apartments only showed B1, but Marcus Williams had discovered the truth. There was a Sublevel 2, and whatever happened there was worth finishing to keep secret. Tonight, Darren was going to find it. At 2 a.m., the Meridian Apartments felt like a sleeping giant. Darren had waited until the building settled into its deepest quiet, when even the most restless tenants would be asleep. Sarah's journalist friend, Maria Santos, was parked outside in her car with instructions to call the police if they didn't emerge by dawn. It wasn't much of a safety net, but it was better than nothing. Darren's hands shook as he picked the lock on the basement door. The skills he'd learned as a rebellious teenager finally had a purpose beyond impressing his friends. The ancient lock gave way with a soft click that sounded thunderous in the silence. The basement was exactly what he'd expected: concrete walls, exposed pipes, the smell of mildew and old detergent. Industrial washing machines hummed against one wall, and metal shelving units held cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. But Darren wasn't interested in the obvious. He was looking for what didn't belong. He moved carefully, his phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. Behind the washing machines, just as he'd suspected, the wall didn't look quite right. The concrete blocks were a slightly different color, and when he pressed against them, they felt hollow. But it wasn't the wall that hid the entrance to Sublevel 2. It was the floor. In the far corner, hidden behind a stack of paint cans and old furniture, Darren found what he was looking for. A metal grate covered what looked like a drainage access, but when he cleared away the debris, he realized it was much larger than any drain should be. The grate was hinged, and beneath it, a rusted iron ladder descended into darkness. His phone's flashlight beam revealed rough concrete walls and the outline of another floor about 12 feet down. This was it, the hidden sublevel that Marcus Williams had discovered. The descent felt like entering hell. Each rung of the ladder was slick with condensation, and the air grew colder and more stale with every foot. When his shoes finally touched solid ground, Darren found himself in a narrow corridor that stretched in both directions, lit only by his phone's dying battery. To his left, the corridor ended at a heavy metal door marked with a simple 1. To his right, another door bore the number 2, and beyond that, he could make out at least 2 more doors disappearing into the darkness. The hidden basement units. The source of all those impossible rental payments. Darren tried the first door, but it was locked with a deadbolt that looked much newer than anything else in the building. The second door was the same, but when he reached the third door, marked with a faded 3, the handle turned easily. The smell hit him first, a mixture of human sweat, fear, and something else he couldn't identify. His flashlight revealed a small room, maybe 10 feet by 12, with concrete walls and no windows. But what made his stomach lurch were the signs that people had been living here recently. 3 folding cots lined the walls, each with thin blankets and flat pillows. A plastic bucket sat in one corner next to a stack of cheap toilet paper. Fast food containers and water bottles were scattered across a makeshift table made from a piece of plywood balanced on concrete blocks. This wasn't storage. This wasn't maintenance. This was housing, illegal, subhuman housing where people had been kept like prisoners. As Darren stepped further into the room, his foot kicked something that skittered across the concrete floor. He aimed his light down and felt his heart stop. A child's backpack, pink with unicorn decorations. The name tag read Keisha Williams, in careful first-grade handwriting. Little Keisha, the 5-year-old from the family photos. The baby starting kindergarten in her mother's last Instagram post. With trembling hands, Darren picked up the backpack. Inside, he found crayons, a half-finished coloring book, and a small stuffed elephant with one ear chewed off. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, was a cell phone. Marcus Williams's phone. Darren's hands were shaking so badly he could barely unlock the device. But somehow muscle memory kicked in, and he managed to access the voice recordings. There were dozens of files, most just a few seconds long. He pressed play on the most recent one. Marcus's voice, barely a whisper. Day 12 down here. They're keeping us separated, but I can hear Shanice crying in the next room. Kids are scared but trying to be brave. If someone finds this, the basement's the key to everything. They're using this place for more than just fake tenants. People disappear here. The next recording was even more chilling. Torino brought more people today. Families who couldn't pay rent, people behind on payments. They bring them down here, make them work off their debts. But the debts never go away. Nobody ever leaves. A third recording, dated just days before the Williams family had officially vanished. If something happens to us, tell the truth. The basement's the key. He knows we saw too much. We tried to run but... Footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete. Marcus's voice became urgent. Someone's coming. Hiding the phone. If you find this, please. A door slamming. A woman screaming, Shanice's voice. A child crying. Then Marcus shouting. Get away from my family! We'll keep quiet, we swear! Please don't! The recording cut to silence. Darren sat in the darkness, clutching the phone in Keisha's backpack, tears streaming down his face. The Williams family hadn't just discovered fraud, they'd uncovered a trafficking operation. People who couldn't pay their rent, families in desperate situations, were being brought down here and forced into some kind of modern slavery. And when the Williams family had tried to expose it, they'd become victims themselves. A sound from above made Darren freeze. Footsteps in the main basement. Someone was coming. He quickly pocketed the phone and grabbed the backpack, his mind racing. He needed to get this evidence to Maria, to the police, to anyone who could stop this nightmare. But first, he had to get out alive. The footsteps were getting closer to the hidden entrance. Soon, whoever was coming would discover that someone had found their secret. Darren had seconds to decide, hide and hope they didn't find him, or make a run for the ladder. The footsteps above were moving systematically, searching. Harold's voice drifted down through the grate, along with another man's voice he didn't recognize. "Someone's been down here," Harold was saying. "Door was picked, grate's been moved." "Find them," the other voice commanded. Darren recognized it now, Vincent Torino, the landlord. "Nobody gets out with what they've seen." Darren clutched Marcus's phone and Keisha's backpack tighter, knowing he was holding the evidence that would finally bring justice for the Williams family. But first, he had to survive the next few minutes. He moved as quietly as possible toward the ladder, but his foot kicked an empty water bottle that clattered across the concrete. The sound echoed through the sublevel like a gunshot. "There!" Harold's voice was excited, vicious. "B3! Get down there!" Heavy boots clanged on the metal ladder. Darren had nowhere to run in the narrow corridor, nowhere to hide. As Harold's flashlight beam swept toward him, he made a desperate decision. "Maria!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, hoping his voice would carry up through the building. "Call the police! Trafficking in the basement! Multiple victims!" Harold's flashlight found him, and behind the maintenance man, Torino's bulk filled the narrow corridor. "You stupid kid," Torino snarled. "You have no idea what you've walked into." "I know exactly what this is," Darren said, backing against the wall. "You're running a slave operation. Taking people who can't pay rent, forcing them to work off debts that never get smaller. The Williams family found out, so you finished them." Harold laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Finish them? Boy, we don't finish'll nobody. Too messy. We just relocate them to places where asking questions ain't healthy." "Where are they?" Darren demanded. "Does it matter?" Torino stepped closer. "You're about to join them." But even as they advanced on him, Darren could hear something beautiful, sirens in the distance, getting closer. Maria had heard his shout and made the call. "Too late," he told them with a smile he didn't feel. "It's over." Torino's face twisted with rage. "Maybe for us, but not for you." Harold raised a wrench, but before he could swing it, the basement above exploded with voices and footsteps. Police officers were shouting orders, and someone was calling for backup. The next few hours passed in a blur of paramedics, detectives, and crime scene investigators. Darren found himself sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, and giving his statement for the third time to Detective Rosa Martinez. "You're lucky to be alive," she told him, closing her notebook. "We found evidence of at least 30 people who've passed through those basement rooms over the past 5 years. Most were vulnerable families, immigrants, people with nowhere else to turn." "What about the Williams family?" Detective Martinez's expression softened. "We found records that suggest they were moved to a similar operation in Detroit. We have teams coordinating with Michigan authorities. There's hope, Mr. Green. Real hope." 3 months later, Darren stood in a packed courtroom as Vincent Torino was sentenced to 25 years for trafficking, fraud, and racketeering. Harold Getz had testified against his boss in exchange for a lighter sentence, revealing the locations of 4 other buildings running similar operations. The Williams family had been found alive in a Detroit warehouse, along with 8 other families who'd been trapped in the trafficking network. They were traumatized but safe, and slowly rebuilding their lives with help from victim services. Darren had used the reward money from the investigation to start the Williams Family Foundation, providing legal aid and housing assistance to vulnerable tenants across Chicago. The foundation's first office was in a renovated building on the south side, nowhere near the Meridian Apartments. The building itself had been condemned and was scheduled for demolition. But before the wrecking ball arrived, Darren made one final visit. He climbed the stairs to what had been his apartment, Unit 4B, and made his way to the corner where he'd first found the rent ledger. The radiator was gone, removed as evidence, but the warped baseboard remained. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a copy of the original ledger. The real one was locked away in evidence storage. He'd added one final entry, written in his own careful handwriting. "Truth buried here. Justice found. Never forget the Williams family and all who suffered in the darkness below. Their courage saved others. D. Green, teacher and witness. He slipped the copy into the space behind the baseboard, exactly where Marcus Williams had hidden the original. As he walked out of the building for the last time, Darren thought about courage, about a father who'd risked everything to document the truth, about a family who'd paid the ultimate price for standing up to corruption, about the power of one person to make a difference. The Meridian Apartments would soon be rubble, but the memory of what happened there would live on in the foundation that bore the Williams name, in the families who were rescued because of their sacrifice, and in the simple truth that some secrets are too important to stay buried. Marcus Williams had been right. The basement had been the key to everything. Not just to the crimes that were committed there, but to the justice that followed, and to the hope that no other family would ever have to suffer in the darkness below.